Great. Okay.
Okay, well, welcome everybody. I'm Laurie Ferris, one of the chapter coordinators for the Northern California chapter of American Pilgrims on the Camino. And we are very excited to have our Camino 101 Basics today, presented by Andy Cohn. So a little bit about Andy. With his wife, Kate, Andy has walked the Camino Frances twice, as well as other principal Caminos in northern Spain and Portugal. They have also walked numerous other Caminos in Europe, especially in France and Italy, and last year went to Japan to walk the Kumano Kodo. Andy has been very active in our chapter, leading hikes, mentoring new pilgrims, and also giving other presentations about Caminos that he's walked. And at the end of last year, he joined Guy and me as a co-coordinator of our Northern California chapter. So welcome, everybody, and I'm going to pass the mic over to you, Andy.
Okay. Thank you, Laurie. I'm trying to make sure I get this. Let me make all right, that works. Just checking to see if everything works. Um, Thank you, Laurie, of course. Also want to thank my wife, Kate, who's always accompanies me and is kind of my guide here. And a shout out to Rich and Karen Hubble, who are really good at sharing information. I know they're on the Zoom here, and I'm using some of their pictures here. I'm not technologically skilled enough to credit them under the picture, but some of these are theirs, so I want to give them credit and thank them. So I was a little bit reluctant actually to do this presentation when Laurie asked me to do it, um, in part because it kind of implies that I know what I'm talking about. And I really don't. I only know my way, the way I did it. And the beauty of the Camino is there's really no one way to do it. There's lots of ways, and everyone has their way. And that's kind of a cliche, but I really do believe it. So take what I say with a grain of salt, and remember there's no shoulds, oughts, gottes, and musts. There's only your way. But with that caveat, I'm going to plunge in anyway. And I hope I'm not too overbearing and what's the word, male splaining. Um, it's, maybe it comes natural, but anyway, feel free to answer questions at the end. We'll spend we're going to cover some history and background to start with. We'll spend some time on the Camino Frances, which is the most popular of the Caminos, and then we'll cover some logistics and planning. And a lot of that got left on the cutting room floor, as it were, in the interest of length. So I did attach, Laurie attached the planning guide that I wrote, which is attached to the confirmation reminder email you got yesterday. And that's got a lot of details on planning and logistics with websites and links and stuff. So it covers everything I'm going to be saying here and a lot more. And at the end, we'll have some time for questions. Okay, so what is the Camino? Well, just as there's no one way to do the Camino, there's not just one Camino. It is a network of trails, of caminos, plural, that all terminate in Western Spain in Santiago de Compostela. I think you can see my cursor here. It's said that the Camino starts at your front door, and later on I'll show you an actual emblem of that. And the most dominant Camino is the so-called Camino Frances. That's the red line here. But I just want to emphasize at the start, that's the one you're gonna, that the movies are all made about the way and the way, my way. But I just want to emphasize at the start that it's only one in a whole network of trails, many of which you don't even see here. So Santiago de Compostela is the place where the apostle James the Greater, who went to Spain to convert the heathens after the crucifixion, was supposedly discovered some 800 years after his death in the year 813, I believe. And shortly after the discovery, credulous Christians encouraged by the ecclesiastical powers that be, began to flock to Santiago from all over Europe. So they originally crossed Spain. Oops, didn't want to go there yet. Originally crossed Spain across its northern coast. And then as the nasty Moors and other infidels, such as my people, were pushed south, the Camino Frances became the dominant Camino and remains so to this day. But bear in mind that it's really only one Camino in an entire network. And while today it's the most, it still remains a route of pilgrimage for many, for most people, it's just a great walk through rural Spain. So here's James at the Last Supper. He's two to Christ's left. He was an important dude. Apparently, he was there at the Transfiguration. I have no idea what that is, being an atheist Jew, but I know it's an important event. After Christ's death, as I said, he went to Spain to preach. There's also a darker side to the Camino. The name for St. James in Spain is Santiago. That's where the place gets its name, obviously. And the darker side is that the Caminos were not just a religious pilgrimage, but they were a means of pushing the so-called infidels out of Spain, the Moors in particular. And here you see a sculpture. It's from, I took this picture in the cathedral in Burgos on the Camino Frances, a picture of James himself resurrected at the mythical battle of Clavico in the 12th and the 10th century on horseback, stomping Moors to death under the hooves of his horse. It's not a pretty picture. Fortunately, it's not representative of modern Spain, which by all accounts is one of the most welcoming and opening societies in all of Europe. Top left is you see the massive sign on City Hall in Madrid. First time we went there at the height of European xenophobia, refugees welcome. Spain also has a socialist government. On the top right, you see the sign entering, when you enter in Santiago, the rainbow colors are not there by accident. And on the bottom right was a drag show that we stumbled onto right in the heart of Logroño, which is a very lively but still provincial city in the middle of Spain. And this was happening right in the central plaza in Logroño on a Saturday night. And I dare say you'd never see an equivalent picture, an equivalent scene happening in Dubuque, Iowa. My dog is creating some kind of havoc behind me, but you'll forgive that. So who walks the walk? Well, lots of people, more each year. The first time we walked was 2012. And these are the numbers of people who reached Santiago and received the certificate of completion. So that number has increased 2.5-fold in the intervening, whatever, it's been 12 years since then. Wide age range, 12% are over 65. Among Americans, it's actually 24% are over 65. There are more women than men. 54% of all the pilgrims are women. That percentage, again, is higher at 61% among Americans. So I guess the message is that if you're a woman of a certain age, you're not going to be alone on the Camino. Some more numbers. Spain, of course, provides the biggest number of pilgrims. The United States is now second. Predictably, it's going to be Western countries, Catholic countries that predominate, or Christian countries that predominate on the Camino. The only exception is Korea, which I discovered to my surprise was a largely Catholic country. I had no idea about that. You do see a lot of Koreans. They often travel in groups with only maybe one of them speaking English. But it's fun to run into somebody from an entirely different culture. Frances is the most popular. The Portuguese, which comes up from Lisbon and Porto, is next and is rapidly gaining in popularity to the extent that within 10 years, it'll probably eclipse the Française. You're going to hear people tell you, especially if your plan is to walk the Française as your first Camino, how horribly overcrowded it's becoming. Now, there's plenty of people on the Française here, but I created this graph to illustrate the fact that it's actually less crowded than it was 15 years ago. And the reason the overall numbers are higher is that because the number of people who start in Saria, which is the 100-kilometer point where the minimum distance you can walk to obtain the certificate of completion at the end, that number has gone up sixfold in 15 years, from 26,000 to 150,000. And that accounts for all of the growth on the Française and more. So the rest of the Française, if you don't do that part, or if you start further back, is actually less crowded than it was 15 years ago. So I just put that in to kind of disabuse the notion that the Française has become horribly crowded, or much more horribly crowded than it was. And in fact, there's a lot more infrastructure on it than there was even 12 years ago when we first walked it. Why do people walk the walk? So this group, we met them in Western Spain, actually west of Santiago, had walked all the way from Lithuania carrying a life-sized replica of the crucifixion, which you can barely see here. It is, after all, a religious pilgrimage, but among the many, many Caminos I've walked, this is the first time and only time that I've seen a group that so overtly wore religion on their sleeves, as it were. It's not a common sight. But you do meet a lot of people who are in transition, with just kind of taking time off from life to figure it all out, as it were. They finish college, they're retiring, they've lost a loved one, they're getting divorced, they're getting married, they're starting a new career. And if you see movies like The Way or The Way, My Way, you'd think that the Camino is populated entirely by people, who are just bearing their souls to you. People will talk if you ask them, but if you don't, they're not. So, if you're uncomfortable among people who are going to bear their soul, you don't have to engage in that conversation. But it's some of the I don't know. To me, it gives it some meaning that people are really often just kind of wrestling with stuff, and myself, I enjoy it, even though quite a few people, myself included, are basically doing it because they're looking for a good time. And I don't think I myself have had an introspective thought since junior high school. But that's me. I spent some time focusing on the Française itself, which again, it's the most popular Camino today. It became the most popular Camino back in the 11th century, when the Moors were finally pushed back from the northern coast and into the, further south in Spain. One thing I want to say at the outset is that what you see here are essentially the 33 stages that many of the guidebooks will break it into. There's nothing magical about these stages. They simply represent the larger towns. 33 days is kind of what an average person might take to walk the 500 miles of its length from Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port to Santiago. But there's nothing, there's no compulsion to walk it in a certain number of days. There's no compulsion to adhere to the stages. If you get off the stages, as we did when we were there in the fall, you'll find it's a much quieter kind of Camino with smaller and very, very welcoming towns. And there's also no compulsion to start in Saint-Jean-Pied-de-Port or any particular place along here. You can start wherever you want. You can even start days back in France. So what you see here, again, one thing to note is, there's a fair number of large size cities beyond these smaller towns as Pamplona, Logroño, Burgos, León, Astorga, Ponferrada. These are all cities of 100,000 people or more. So, you're walking a road to a destination, not through a wilderness trail. And to that end, it ain't the PCT, the Pacific Coast Trail. That's a picture I took in Desolation Valley on a backpacking trip. I think it was 5 years ago. There's not 1 inch of the Frances or most of the Caminos in Spain that resemble that picture. Just that, by and large, you'll find it's scenic. It's not spectacular. I kind of liken it to walking through rural Napa. It's again a road to a destination that's scenic, but it's not there to take you to the highest peaks across Spain. The bottom picture is perhaps representative of what much of the front says, and many of the other Caminos look like. You can see the trail there, the dirt trail right next to the road. Sometimes you're actually on a road. You can see cultivated field to your left. It was October when I took this picture, so the crops have already been harvested. And in the background, you see a little village that we were headed to. That is more representative of what the front says, and indeed most of the Caminos look like, than the picture on the top. So you won't be alone, especially on the Frances or the Portuguese, which is the second most popular one. It's almost certain that you'll be inside of somebody ahead of you and people coming up behind you. Um, and for me, I find this aspect very attractive because I really feel like you're part of a community of people all heading in the same direction towards a common goal. And every day you're sharing experiences, the good, the bad, the ugly, as it were. And this sense of community is really what makes the Caminos unique, for me in particular. You get, some of it, you get a lot of it if you've done some backpacking, but you don't, usually when you're off backpacking, you're with your own little group, and on the front says you really form groups of people you've never met before, and you hook up with them and maybe walk for days or weeks on end, if you want, of course. Super well marked. You can't get lost. There's these signs, yellow arrows, everywhere. I said before, the Camino begins at home, and there indeed is the Camino marker in my backyard, indicating that we are 817.59 kilometers from the plaza in front of the cathedral in Santiago de Compostela. That's the same marker you're going to see all over Spain. And my wife bought me one for my 70th birthday, and it was a great surprise to come home and find it. Breaking down the Frances, just quickly, into kind of its subparts. Again, these stages have no significance other than to represent what an average person might take to do it. So the first 3 days, if you start in Saint Jean, you're going to cross the Pyrenees at a fairly low pass. The high point is about 4,800 feet. But that first day, you're going to be climbing more than 4,000 feet in the course of 10 miles. It's a slog. It's beautiful, but it's certainly difficult. You can break it up. You don't even have to start in Saint Jean. You could start later on, or you could start a few days before and warm up to this, to the first climb. One thing to note again is you're not off in the wilderness. Even in this picture in the top, you can see houses down there, and most of the time, as you see in the bottom left, you're walking on a paved surface. So again, not a wilderness trail, a civilized a trail through a civilized country. Bottom right is the running of the bulls, statue in Pamplona, the city that Hemingway obviously made famous. So for the next week and a half, you're going to be in the provinces of Navarre and La Rioja, flanked by the cities of Pamplona and Burgos, with Logroño in the middle, all major towns. Tuscan-like landscape, rolling hills, vineyards, La Rioja wine, um, wonderful, wonderful cities, very open. It was our first Camino was to walk roughly a week through that area, and that's what got us hooked on walking the Caminos. So the landscape is going to change once you get past Burgos. I say Clint Eastwood was here because The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, the famous spaghetti western made by Sergio Leone, starring Clint Eastwood, was indeed filmed in the Meseta. Um, it's wide open sky. A lot of people skip over it. Personally, I love it. I love the fact that it's kind of empty. The sky is vast. The crowds thin out, and you really get to kind of know people as you're walking, merely because there are fewer of them. Little dots of the towns, as you can see on the lower left corner. You feel like you're in Spain, maybe from 70, 80, 100 years ago. And you've got, Burgos on one end, Leon and Astorga, both wonderfully welcoming cities, all three wonderfully welcoming cities. So once you get out of the Meseta, you get back into the hills. And I've divided Galicia into two parts for a reason that'll become clear in a moment. Um, you hit the high point, and there's me at the high point. It's roughly 5,100 feet. It's not a super hard climb like the initial climb was. That's the so-called Cruz de Ferro monument at the high point. It's wonderfully green. It's rolling, really scenic. Probably the most, sustained, lovely stretch of scenery along the Frances. So that's the first part of Galicia. You hit Sarria, and there's an abrupt change. Again, that's the point, the minimum amount of distance you need to walk, the 100-kilometer distance you need to walk to get the certificate of completion at the end. So the crowds increase astronomically. It's pretty much going to look like this from roughly mid-May into mid-October. That kind of a party atmosphere, it's fun. But if you're coming at it from a long distance, like you've already walked 2, 3, 400 miles, you might feel a little bit put out by the crowds, by the noise. And frankly, you're just going to have to accept it and go with the flow. And finally, at the end, you get to the cathedral at Santiago. I've been there 8 times now, and I never stop feeling just overwhelmed with emotion when I get there. It's a gorgeous sight. Huge plaza surrounded by Baroque buildings. Pilgrims just stretched out, as you see here, just taking in the sight, just really marveling at what they've gone through, what they've experienced, and the very end. Cathedral itself, of course, top left, that's the, I don't know what you call it, the urn that contains or supposedly contains the ashes of St. James Santiago. Um, Deacons pulling on the ropes that make this huge censer called the Butafomero swing over the transept in the cathedral. Um, Even if you're a total non-believer like me, it's quite a spectacle going to Mass in Santiago. And of course, if you're a believer, I'm sure the experience is even richer. All of Santiago looks like this. Um, it's a heavily tourist city, but it's very different from any other major tourist city you've been in Spain because of the fact that all the tourists are pilgrims like you. So it's got a very relaxed, welcoming vibe to it. Okay, let me just give me a moment here. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, this is kind of the big existential question, to plan or not to plan. And the wonderful thing about the Camino is you don't have to plan anything. It's totally unlike any other vacation you've taken in your life. You can literally show up at the train station in Madrid, buy a ticket to any place on the Camino, and start walking without a reservation, without a plan. And this is exactly what we did the first time we did the Camino. Um, there's lots of advantages to not planning, or at least not planning a lot. The main advantage is that you can adjust. It's really likely that at some point, some form of shit is going to happen to you. You're going to wrench your back, your knee's going to be sore, you're going to get a cold, something's going to happen. If you've got your whole Camino planned out in front of you, you can't take a day off to deal with whatever's happened to you. So that's one advantage of not planning or not getting too carried away with it. The other thing is that you're going to meet people along the way. And often there's going to be people you're going to want to see again, you're going to walk with. If you've got it all laid out for yourself, you're not going to be able to do that. You're just going to have to hit your marks as they appear. You can also change the kind of places you're staying in. You know, you may have thought that you wanted to stay in hostels all the way, and then you find that you can't stand hostels, so you want to switch to hotels, or vice versa, that you feel isolated in hotels. If you've got it all planned out, you don't have that kind of flexibility. Nevertheless, if you're watching this, you're probably into planning. So I'm going to give you some suggestions. And again, remember, there's lots more details in the planning guide that was attached to the reminder email. So the first thing is guides, apps, internet sites. And, you know, everybody's got his favorite here. All I can do is give you mine and give you a little bit of why they're my favorite. So Brearley's guidebook, you see the picture on the right. Brearley is the kind of seminal guide writer. He wrote his first one in 2001 or something. If you've seen The Way or The Way, My Way, the characters in the movies are carrying Brearley. It's the most well-known guidebook. And especially for beginners, it's my favorite. And the reason it is because it's comprehensive. It gives you history, background, describes the towns you're going in, good, clear maps, lots of details on accommodations, and tells you about alternatives to the way. And um, it's just, you know, he just covers it all. Other guidebooks may do one aspect better than another, but you know, I like Brierley for his comprehensive overview. Um, Everyone loves Grans. It's a Spanish website. If you open it in Google Chrome, it'll translate into English. Everybody just bookmarks it on their phone. Bronze has a section on virtually every Camino in Spain and even in France and Italy as well. It's especially good on accommodations. It's as a website, it's really up to date. It gives you prices. It gives you details about accommodations, and it also gives you pictures, reviews, and pictures. I find the pictures particularly useful because sometimes they may show that with hostels in particular, that the beds are all on top of one another, and maybe you want to avoid that kind of situation. So you get a good Grunz is really useful for that. Wise Pilgrim's a good detailed app. It's just kind of just the facts, the straight facts. I'm a fan of it. There's a ton of them that people will recommend. The Camino Forum it's a website. It's run out of Santiago, but it's in English, and it's a great place to go with really specific nitty-gritty questions. So I recommend that. Gron's, Wise Pilgrim both have GPS tracks attached to them. And with respect to Gron's, it's a separate app. Mappy CZ is a navigation app that I especially like. It's free, and it's got all the Caminos in the world as well as every hiking trail already on it. It's kind of like Google Maps, but with hiking trails as well as the roads. Accommodations. Well, there's private rooms and communal rooms. The communal living is hostels essentially. They're called albergues in Spain. You'll find with respect to private rooms, they come in lots of different forms. In the smaller towns, there'll be hostels, which an A as opposed to hostels with an E. And they're kind of like small inns. In the larger towns, you'll find hotels. You'll also find that the albergues, the hostels themselves, often have private rooms, and I'll talk about them in a moment. Um, the costs are pretty much, um, with respect to private rooms, the costs are pretty much the same, whether it's a hotel, a hostal, or a private room in an albergue. They come in different types. Don't get too hung up on the distinctions. Um, I deliberately took that picture of an albergue that everybody loves. It's on the Camino Aragonés, not on the Frances. It's called Ares. You can see my wife between the bunk beds squeezed in there. So that might be the worst of the albergues I ever stayed in. They don't generally look like that. There's usually more space, but I picked that picture because it's kind of dramatic on how closely things are squeezed in. So the advantages of the albergues, well, the disadvantages are obvious. I mean, it's communal living. You've got to deal with, other people in the room with you, and sometimes that's not entirely pleasant. But I just want to focus on the advantages. And the prime one is that they cater to pilgrims. They're set up, you know, for pilgrims. You're going to find a place to dry your clothes. You'll find a place to wash your clothes. You generally find a communal room to hang out with. You can often take dinner in the hostel and enjoy the communal experience. And I think that's really the big plus about the albergues. Also, obviously, they're going to be less expensive. In the fall of 2024, when we were on the Frances, we spent, the range was like €8 to €15 per bed per person. There didn't seem to be a lot of correlation between how nice it was and the price. It was just random range. The picture you see is an albergue we stayed at in 2015 and again in 2024. And I was amused that it was only €5 back then. I think it was 13 or 14 euros in 2024. So prices have gone up in the intervening time. So private rooms, again, the advantages are obvious. It's going to be a more comfortable situation. Um, just the one thing to be aware of, and I know, people have found this, and it can be a problem, especially if you've like really planned everything in advance, is that you've been walking and all of a sudden you kind of realize that you haven't really met a lot of people. Especially in the bigger towns where there are a lot of accommodations, if you stay, in hotels or hostels, it can be an isolating experience. In the smaller towns, especially the towns between the stage towns, it's less isolating because the whole town is only 1 block long and there's only one place to eat where everybody's eating there anyway. But that's just something to be aware of if you're staying in private rooms. Um, it's obviously more expensive. We paid in 2024 anywhere between 35 and 70 euros a night. That's for a double room. Figure I'm paying 2/3 to 3/4 of that if you're single. So it's more expensive if you're doing singles. And again, there was no correspondence between quality and price. The 70 euros was actually a private room in an albergue. 35 euros was a lovely hostel. In this small city of Sahagun. Um, I also point out that the albergues often have private rooms, and that's a great place to split the difference. In other words, you get to take in the communal life in the albergue, but at the same time you have some privacy. So that was kind of our default when we could do that. Spoiled that. Okay, on the left is dinner on a Camino in Italy. On the right is dinner on a Camino in France. I've spent several hundred nights on Caminos in Spain, and I don't think I've ever been tempted to take a picture of the food. In fact, I know I've never been tempted to take a picture of the food. It ain't that great. You can do better if you want to stay up late and eat in a real restaurant, but they generally open up in Spain around the time you're going to be heading to bed. So mostly you're going to be eating pilgrim's meals, either served by the albergue you're in or a little, pub type place, a cafe in town. The quality ain't great, but it's filling. You'll get 3 courses, wine for 15 euros, including tax and tip. So by and large, you ain't doing it for the food, but I think you love the meal times, or certainly we did. Um, Much of the time, maybe most of the time, you're going to be eating with people you met, especially if you stay in the hostels, but even in the small towns, because there's only going to be like one bar or a small restaurant to eat in. The great thing about these pictures is, except for Rich and Karen Hubble down on the bottom right corner, whom we met by accident in Leon, we didn't know any of these people beforehand. And probably half of the people that you see in these pictures, which date back more than 10 years, we're still in touch with them. And we've seen them and even walked with them subsequently. Um, our friend Renata and her daughter in this picture, where my cursor is, we're actually going to see her in Italy in 3 weeks from now. Um, and they come from all over the world. So, I mean, again, for me, this kind of communal feeling, the gathering, the togetherness is what makes the Caminos really special. I'm not going to dwell on gear because it's just kind of a minefield of contradictions, and everybody's got his own point of view. There are basically two things that people agree on. One is no cotton. So here you see cotton is heavy and it never dries out. So here you see me on my first Camino in Italy in 2008 with my heavy cotton sweat socks dangling from my pack and my insufferably hot blue jeans wrapping around my leg. I did not make that mistake again. The other thing that people agree on is going light. You can kind of take a metaphorical approach to it and say that the Camino is all about stripping down to essentials, and that means getting rid of your extra crap. You're not going to find any fancy dressers on the Camino. If you remember back to those pictures of people eating, nobody is dressed up. There's not a fancy restaurant on the entire Camino where you're going to want to get dressed up. So you can leave all that stuff at home. The other thing to remember, and this is kind of psychological to maybe help you to get light, is that the whole Camino, the Caminos are really the economic lifeblood of northern Spain. So they're geared to help pilgrims because the pilgrims are what support these towns. And you're going to go through a town every 2 miles, every 3 miles. There's going to be a pharmacy. There's going to be a sporting goods store in the most little, tiniest shithole of a town in the middle of nowhere that you couldn't have, never would have expected. So you don't have to be prepared because if you've left something home or if something runs out, there's a store right ahead. Try and banish the what ifs and the just in cases. If if you take, you know, if you carry everything to suit all the what ifs that might happen, you're going to be carrying an extra 20 pounds. And then some form of crap is sure to happen. You're going to be carrying too much. You're going to wrench your back. Your knee's going to go out. You're going to get blistered because you're carrying too much weight. So just try and banish the what ifs and just in cases. If you've left something behind or something unexpected happens, you can buy it there. People will tell you that something weighs nothing. They're lying to you. Everything weighs something. And if you want to prove it to yourself, get a kitchen scale that weighs things in grams, which very quickly will get you thinking about how much things actually weigh. And you'll be as crazy as I am because you'll take something that only weighs 5 grams, in other words, a fifth of an ounce, instead of 10 grams, which is a third of an ounce. But it's a really good tool. Um, Choose the lightest possibility. You've got a phone charger that weighs 1 ounce and a phone charger that weighs 3 ounces. They'll both charge your phone overnight. Take the 1 ounce charger. Take the 3 ounce t-shirt, not the 7 ounce t-shirt. Finally, people will tell you, you got to do something. You must do something. You ought to have something. Ignore the gottas, the musts, the oughts, including mine. Pilgrim passport, you'll need this to stay at albergues. You'll need to show it when you arrive in Santiago if you want to get your completion certificate. You can get it from the American Pilgrims on the Camino. Just go to their website. In the corner, you can see request a credential. You can get it for free. Even if you're not heading to Santiago or staying in albergues, get one. It makes, as you can see, a great souvenir of the places you've stayed in. So this is your certificate you get in Compostela, you get in Santiago. It's called the Compostela. At the end of last year, they changed the rules, presumably to cut down on the crowds. You now no longer have to walk the last 100 kilometers. You can walk any consecutive 100 kilometers, or actually 80 kilometers, leading to on a Camino leading to Santiago, and then skip ahead to the last stage, which is 25 kilometers from Santiago. Walk that into Santiago, and you're entitled to get a Compostela. Whether that works to cut down the crowds, I don't know. I don't know how many people are going to walk the first 80 kilometers and then skip ahead 400 miles, to walk the last one. But the rules have changed. You can ship your bags. You can do it either ad hoc, in other words, day by day. It's very, very easy to do, or you can arrange to ship your bags, in advance for all of your stages. The best known companies, and there are a lot of them, are Jackotrans or Correos, which is actually the Spanish post office. You can also use Correos to ship, sort of extra stuff all the way to Santiago or to wherever your endpoint is, to any post office in Spain. Costs you €6. Present rate is €6 per bag per stage. Again, it's really easy to do. All the places you'll stay, including hostels, except for the so-called municipal hostels run by the municipalities, will have these baggage tags. You just fill them out, and Jocko Trans or one of the other companies will pick your stuff up in the morning. Reserving on the fly. If you're not going to do it all in advance, it's very easy to do on a day-by-day basis, or as I say, you can just show up and find a place to stay. We typically reserve a night in advance. We have in the past, and even on this last Camino, sometimes just showed up at places. Grants is the best place for accommodations. You need to know one sentence in Spanish. Do you have a bed for me tomorrow night? They use WhatsApp to messaging and phone app to communicate. Don't be entirely seduced by booking.com. I use it a ton, but be careful because often places that say they're sold out on booking.com really aren't. And I've had like many, many encounters with pilgrims who say a place is totally filled up. They couldn't get a reservation. I arrive at the place and find that there are plenty of beds, plenty of rooms, and that's because they've only checked booking.com. A lot of places also don't list at all on booking.com. So as I say, don't be entirely seduced by booking.com as a means of making reservations. I put together a few budgets. I think they're realistic, and you'll see why in a minute. The beer budget means you're staying in hostels all the time. You're eating pilgrim meals. It came out at €50 a day. You could easily cut that down by €10, for example, by cooking for yourself in most or many of the albergues have cooking facilities you can use. So you can easily save money if you're really doing it on the cheap. You could probably cut that down to €40 a day, approximately $55, approximately $1.10. The champagne budget is if you stay entirely in private rooms. You find restaurants where you spend a little bit more money, though that's actually kind of hard to do. You use baggage transport, and you can see I've given you two prices because it's more expensive if you're single because the room price is not going to be half what it would be if you're a couple. So, roughly 80 to €95, depending whether you're in a couple or whether you're traveling on your own. So the only other possibility is to hire one of these tour companies. I've never done it. I understand the temptation to do it. It takes the anxiety out of it. I know it's, stressful going off on an adventure like this. And, I fully understand. I actually used a tour company when I went to Japan because I myself was pretty freaked out about going to such a foreign country. But I did, and you will pay 2 to 3 times what it'll cost to make the arrangements yourself. And it's really easy to make them yourself, even if you just stick with booking.com. You'll find equivalent type places. You're not going to spend all that much time if you just go, town by town by town with booking.com. You can get the itinerary from any of these major companies, and you can just follow along. And as you can see, it's going to be at least twice what it would cost you to just make the arrangements yourself. But I understand, of course, that there's certain security and comfort in doing it that way if you want. And This cost also includes baggage transport, which the tour companies will provide you with. So this was our actual cost, and I did this just, as a reality check. We were closer to a champagne budget. We're at a stage in our lives where where we realize we're not going to run out of money before we kick off. So we weren't being particularly frugal. We stayed roughly 75% of the time in private rooms, rest of the time in dorm rooms. We did not use baggage transport. We didn't really care what we ate. I mean, often we ate Pilgrim meals. That was the only thing available. If there was a better meal available, we did that too. And as you can see, traveling as a couple, it came out to just a little bit more than a beer budget would have been. It came out to, and this was literally every dime we spent from the day we arrived in Bayonne, France, which was our starting point, to when we left Santiago. 57 euros per day. Had we been, had Kate and I not been together, and you follow that same kind of thing, it would have been maybe 10 euros per person per day more, because it's more expensive again to stay by yourself in a private room. Should I learn Spanish? Yes, but one way or another you'll cope. English is becoming more prevalent on the Camino, especially as Americans have become the largest foreign group. Especially on the Frances, you'll muck through. But obviously, if you speak a little Spanish, it'll be a richer experience. Community colleges, adult schools, probably be the most economical solution. And I also give a shout out to our own chapter member, Emilio Escudero, who has put together a primer for beginners, which you can find on our Northern California chapter page there. And it's really, really quite good. Okay, I've been saying that everybody has his own Camino, and that there are really no rules, there's no shoulds, there oughts, there musts on the Camino. But in fact, I've been lying a little bit, and there are my 5 rules on the Camino. And we start with this one. When if you go behind a wall, an abandoned wall in the middle of nowhere because you have to pee, or you slip off into the bushes, again, because you have to pee, this is what you're going to find. Always, everywhere. And it's disgusting. It shows no respect for the country you're in, and it's easy not to do it. So rule number 1 is pack out your toilet paper. You can carry a couple of those plastic bags that people pick up dog poop in with you. If you're really fastidious, you can carry some hand sanitizer, but please don't leave the Camino looking like this. The other 4, give generously. A lot of the albergues, I didn't mention before, but a lot of the albergues, especially the so-called public ones run by municipalities or a nonprofit group, are run as donativos, where you pay what you can. This is not an excuse to be cheap. A school teacher in the Bay Area makes more than the average doctor does in Spain. So give generously. Don't bitch. It's their country. You're a guest. Tourists complain. Pilgrims give thanks. I don't often spout a lot of the mantras that people have about the Caminos, but that's one I believe in. Keep your pack off the bed. Whether you know it or not, that pack has been sitting on a trail laced with cow shit, pig shit, goat shit, and horse shit. Furthermore, your pack is the way bed bugs get from one albergue or hotel room to another. So keep it off the bed, please. And finally, ignore the musts, the shoulds, the oughts, and the gottas. Except for these 5 rules, it is your Camino. Okay. This is Sachio Aoyama.
She's on this call, Andy.
I know that. So I met Sachio about a year and a half ago. She started coming to some of our local walks, asking people about the Camino. She bought a copy of Brearley, and on her own, at the age of 81, there she is. At the age of 81, she set off by herself. She walked 500 miles. I get choked up. 500 miles across Spain by herself, carrying her own pack, not planning anything in advance, taking it as it came to her, and without even a phone. I'm going to let you draw your own moral from that story. I'm done.
Thank you, Andy.
Questions?
And